Is there such thing as a good God or church? Well, today we're going to be discussing a couple of different video games that ask that question. We're going to be talking about both God of War and Assassin's Creed. And you might be thinking, wow, that's a lot of topic. You're right. This is a special double feature episode, not to be confused with our double issues. There's not twice as many hosts, but we will be doing two topics. So to start this one off, I will lead the beginning talking about God of War. Later on, I'm going to be joined. I'm Joshua Noel. Christian Ashley, your co-host, is going to lead the section on Assassin's Creed and finish this episode out. And to make it even extra special, so you have two of our hosts here and a special guest. We have Dr. Benjamin Chicka. He is a professor of philosophy and religion and does a lot with the intersection of video games and religion. He's the senior lecturer of philosophy and religion at Curry College in Milton, Massachusetts. He's a philosophical theologian who connects classical American pragmatism, process theology, and ground of being theology. Also, Trip Fuller describes him as the most, and I quote, the most legit theology and video game expert on the planet. And if Trip Fuller says it, it's got to at least have some truth to it, you know? So, hey,
or hardly any, really.
Depends on his mood and how much he's been drinking. No. So Ben, would you mind introducing yourself to our audience a little bit more and just kind of sharing what you've been geeking out on lately?
Yeah, so thanks for having me on the show. I love podcasts. For those who don't know, before every person on the planet had 8 different podcasts to their name, podcasts actually mostly grew out of the video game industry. That's not like 100% it's just video games. But when video games transitioned from magazines to websites, and then the websites took over and all sorts of outlets kind of shut down, personalities that were searching for jobs, basically, they called it internet radio at the time, but it was podcasts. And some of the figures I still follow in the video game industry came out of that transition around 2005 to 2008. And now here everybody is podcasting, and I love podcasts, so I'm happy to be here. I'm an American pragmatist, so that's like my motivating method. It's basically a fallible form of inquiry into any subject. So that means I'm also fallible about theological claims, so I don't take anything for granted. There needs to be evidence and supporting claims, and basically theology is another form of philosophy for me. It's just philosophy that deals in ultimate matters, as opposed to if you go to a analytic philosophy department, they're still debating if they know they have hands. Not very interesting. I'm more interested in applying philosophy to things that really matter to our lives. And I've been a game player my entire life. Some of my earliest memories are of playing the Atari 2600 with my dad on like some 200-pound RCA wooden console TV. And during my as you said, I teach philosophy and religion at Curry College now. But during my PhD program, when I was ABD, all but dissertation, and writing my dissertation, the video game industry and my interests in religious pluralism and kind of a broad ethical acceptance of the other, especially like LGBTQ plus individuals. I was in California when Prop 8 was being discussed and debated. They kind of smashed together because there was a series of kind of harassments against women and minorities in the gaming industry. And then I was really interested in how the industry changed. And I really started looking at games more seriously then, and how they can change our behavior and make us both worse people, but a lot of games can make us better people. So I wrote a book about it. And it's not every single game, just like not every movie is worthy of scholarly study. There's lots of blockbusters that are just fun and nonsense. But some games can really change the world and change the way people act in it. And it's actually become a big part of my research. So just before the show, I was saying how I've got writing projects I'm working on right now, and I have two more books about video games coming up. So I don't think it's going to go away in my own work, and I think lots more scholars, because the average age of a gamer is me. I'm not going to say what that is, but I'm not 20. And more academics are going to start applying their work to the things they love, just like previous academics did with movies and TV shows. Mm-hmm. So that's who.
Yeah, and we'll share in the description on the podcast, at least, maybe on YouTube. We'll see. I'm bad at retroactively editing YouTube videos, but we'll share a link to an author's page for those who want to check out some of his books. Also, for those who are like, hey, wait a minute, this is part of your Religion and Fandom series, you're right. And we don't usually do YouTube videos for that. But given the circumstance and how special this episode is, we're making an exception. So this will be up on YouTube as well. If you're listening on the podcast and want to see what we're talking about, you can. And to go with what Ben was talking about, a lot of people, I think, just grew up with either games that were kind of like Galaga, that kind of stuff, like arcade games, or grew up with like or a lot of, your old Disney PlayStation games kind of stuff. And I think they only think of it as that kind of stuff and didn't realize the story and the amount of people after The Last One Standing dropped. I'm thinking that's the wrong name. What's it called?
The Last of Us.
The Last of Us. I was like, yeah, that's not right. I knew that name wasn't right. Yeah. Once that show came out, I remember how many people were talking about how, like, wait a minute, this was from a video game? This has like a lot of story. And we're like, yeah, well, the video game has even more. And it's just interesting how people kind of have a disconnect on the kind of stories that games have been telling. We'll get more into that as we go into today's subject. But for now, for those who want to know why we have Dr. Benjamin Chicka here, well, not only because he's a video game expert and he's a really cool guy, but also because he's going to be at Theology Beer Camp 2024 with us. Well, not Christian, with me, Will, and some of the others, some of our hosts. We have a lot of hosts. They can't all be at all things. We're not omnipresent, but there's a lot of us, so we can be at many things. And one of those things will be Theology Beer Camp in Denver, Colorado, October 17th through 19th. Use the code GEEKSHIRE, GEEKSHIRE, to get $50 off and meet us there. Hang out with me and Ben. It'll be a good time. That being said, also, if you're listening or watching or wherever you are, like and subscribe on YouTube. Go over to Podchaser, rate and review the show. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts, you can rate and review there. Spotify, you can do the little rating. You can do like the 5-star thing. That helps us a lot with the algorithms. Big shout out to one of the sponsors of our show, Russell Gentry. We can't do this without people like Russell who support our show on either Patreon, Captivate, or Apple Podcast. One more time, this is part of our Religions and Fandom series. Check out the entire series in the playlist below. Why are we doing two-parter? That might be weird to some of you guys. Let me break this down. We had someone who listens to the show, also a friend of mine, I don't want to say beg, but ask profusely that we do a God of War episode. And then we realized none of our hosts have really played God of War. So we were like, how are we going to do this? I was like, I think the only way is if we also include something else that some of us have done, which they chose Assassin's Creed. Here's the funny part. I've got really into one or two Assassin's Creed games. I'm not really into the series as a whole. I never played God of War, but I was like, I should play it for this. I've been holding on to this, Christian. I've been like downplaying how much I've gotten into God of War the last month, just so I could let you guys know on air. It started with, I'm going to play one of the games, and I'll do the PS4 one where he first does like the Norse stuff. And then it turned into, well, that was great, so I got to do Ragnarok. And then that turned into, well, I need to know the backstory, but I don't want to play all those old games. And I found out there's audiobooks. So I listened to all of the stories from the old games. And then I was like, I'm still missing pieces because there's like mobile games and comics and stuff. So then I looked up all the YouTube synopsis of all of those stories. I have been like hardcore into this. So I went from like, well, I'll talk some about Assassin's Creed. I don't know anything about God of War 2. I know some Assassin's Creed, And now I know a lot about God of War. So here we are.
Excellent.
Yeah. A month in the working reveal. We're here. Well, hey, before we do anything else, what are y'all's histories? Like, as far as like Assassin's Creed, God of War, have y'all played many of the games or been into them that much?
I've played every game in each series, even in Assassin's Creed, the Chronicles offshoots. I said I wasn't going to say my age as a professor earlier, but that kind of indicates it. I was near the end of high school when the first God of War came out. So I've played... I didn't play the PSP ones as much, but I have at least have done hands-on on every single game and every franchise in my time.
Man, I often forget PSP exists, and then as soon as someone says it, I get like flashbacks to like that the Daxter game and the Jack and Daxter on PSP, and there's a couple Ratchet and Clanks there too. But
I played them on when the PS4 came out and they did the PS Plus stuff. I did it on the streaming, so I didn't have the PSP or the Vita, but they made them available via streaming, so I played them that way.
Yeah, that's nice and convenient. Man, Christian, what about you?
For me, I have played intermittently through the series. I have not played the original games of God of War. I have watched playthroughs of them from streamers that I've checked out before, so I know the story. I know what happens for the most part. I've never experienced it, but I did play the first Norse game in the God of War series. I have not played Ragnarok yet, that it's on my list. I highly enjoyed those, the one that I played. And then for Assassin's Creed, I watched my dad play the original games, and I got into the series actually playing it in Black Flag. And I've also done Origins, Odyssey, Valhalla. I have not played the most recent one, Mirage, that just came out not too long ago. And I am very interested to see where they go with Shadows.
You know, really funny. I started again Assassin's Creed for a little while, and the reason I stopped was Black Flag. That was like, for me, I was like, I just can't get into this. It was
wow.
And it's so weird because like I'm the pirate guy. And like all of the pirate, like the lore and stuff they did, watching someone else play it, I was like, story was great. Just playing it myself, the ship mechanics, I just couldn't deal with it.
Wow. Ben, you may or may not know this, but Joshua is often known here as Joshua with the wrong opinions. The bad opinions.
I was gonna say, Black Flag is a high mark for a lot of people in the series.
Oh yeah, including the guy who asked us to do the God of War episode. He's like, not only are you not on, you're adding stuff to my God of War episode, you're also trashing one of my favorite games. That's right. I'm sorry, listener.
It sounds like he needs better friends.
That's true. He does.
I mean, I'm sure we'll get into it, but I think I can kind of guess at some of the reasons why. I can see reasons why Black Flag, that would be the game where it went off the rails for some people. I can understand that.
Yeah. But before we get into the topics proper, which hey, I'm full ADHD. We're doing this in the evening, and I don't have, like, my medicine runs out by this time of the day. Just hang in there with me, guys. What are some of our other favorite video games? As far as, like, if we're going to do a video game episode, I know I've been on the show before talking about Ratchet and Clank. I've even mentioned Jack and Daxter on this today. Really random pool here. Have you heard of a game called Folklore? It was like, no, I think it was one of the original PS3 exclusives. That's one I really enjoyed. That's just a random one. That was like, yeah, Fable games. I love the Fable games. I'm ready. I might get the Xbox Series S when that next Fable comes out, or when Indiana Jones comes out. I'm going to get that next Xbox. I'm not an Xbox guy, but it's happening. Christian.
I mean, my favorite video game of all time is Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2. And you can't go wrong with that series. I'm not an MMO guy, so I'm going to dissuade people from going that way. But that whole series has always been a ton of fun. I love the Mass Effect series. 2 would probably be my favorite out of those. I'm also a Soulsborne kind of guy, so I love my Dark Souls 3 and Bloodborne. Not for their ability to tell you what's going on, but for the fact You know, you can just have fun slashing a bunch of things, get angry, then come back and kill things. It's fun.
You know, I feel like I failed to mention one of my other favorite games we are doing in the religion series when we talk about Dead Space. Yeah, that's going to be fun because there's a lot of religious aspects to that game. Ben, what's some of your favorite video games, including or outside of these that we're talking about today?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm at the point in my life I annoy my wife because she'll say like dinner's ready or can you help me with this, and I'm like, I'm doing research and I'm just playing a video game. But I do kind of
envy that job.
I mean, she knows it's mostly nonsense, but I mean, I do have kind of a professional obligation now to play lots of games, just like people that cover the industry. So Assassin's Creed and God of War, I like a lot. They're nowhere near my favorite of all time. Personally, I like, if I was just like put on the spot, you must name the favorite, like, for you, the best game you've ever played. It's Super Mario World back on the Super Nintendo. I think
fantastic.
Super Mario World is fantastic.
Ooh, excellent choice.
All of the secrets, all of the hidden exits, like, it was, you finish the game and then there's a whole nother game after it before the modern gaming scene kind of really like did that with New Game Plus stuff. Like, it was a big, I mean, it's probably partly responsible for that. I'll say in terms of like current releases that people might be interested in, I'm loving Dragon's Dogma 2 from Capcom.
Yes.
It's basically Dragon's Dogma polished, so you can actually skip Dragon's. As far as if you didn't play Dragon's Dogma, you can skip it because Dragon's Dogma 2 is what they wanted to make, and it looks better because it's PS4 or PS5. I don't know if it's on PS4. I'm playing it on PS5, and I'm playing Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, which I'm loving. Younger listeners that didn't play Final Fantasy VII on the original PlayStation might not be as hyped, but people who like Final Fantasy VII is the RPG that made them get into video games, which is kind of it's not the game, but that time in my life, Final Fantasy VII was a big deal. Final Fantasy VII Remake and the sequel Rebirth are both doing it for me. I highly recommend both.
Nice.
Yeah, you saying that made me think, what, Joshua, why didn't you say Kingdom Hearts?
Well, I was waiting because, like, if we're going to rank this amongst others, Kingdom Hearts is, like, in its own separate thing. Like, it's higher form than a video game. It's like saying Jesus is human. Like, yeah, he was fully human, but, I mean, come on. He's also God, right? So, like, Kingdom Hearts, yeah, it's a video game, but, like, it's also way more than that, you know? No. Kingdom Hearts is my all-time favorite. If I had to pick one that's closely followed, it would probably either be Ratchet & Clank Crack in Time or, and this one is like, most people is like, this is the Ratchet & Clank game you skip, but Ratchet & Clank Quest for Booty. But that's just because pirates, yay. That's that simple. Pirates, yay. That's the whole premise of why I like that. All right. So then, for you guys, or for all of us, because I'll go ahead and compare it. Like, it's nowhere near my top. If we're talking about Assassin's Creed and God of War, they're not near my top. Probably in the middle. Nowhere near like my least favorite games. I'd put it about, I enjoy them as much as I enjoyed South Park Stick of Truth. Yeah, I'm gonna put it there. Which also was a much cheaper game to produce and should not be as good as it was, in my opinion. But anyway. Christian, where are you putting these as far as like if you had to rank them amongst your favorite games?
Well, it'd be unfair to me to put some of them since I didn't actually play them. So for the ones I've actually played, I mean, they'd be, I mean, there's probably none I'd put below, like maybe an 8 out of 10, but there wouldn't be any 10 out of 10s from the franchise, if that makes any sense. So they'd be within that range. Yeah. For those who follow the show for any time, you know that when I rate, I do it compared to other things. So 10 is my favorite. It's not perfect. And 0 is like the least good.
So in video games, it's really not fair because Kingdom Hearts is a 10 and everything else is like compared to Kingdom Hearts. So they're all ones or zeros. That's it. Sorry. Anyway, Ben, how are you comparing these games to some of your other favorites?
Well, I mean, if we're comparing the Kingdom Hearts, then every other game that's ever existed is a 10 because I can't get it.
Oh, false. That is the epitome of gaming.
Because I can't, like, I get Kingdom Hearts is one of the great things that's happened in the video game industry is how the coverage shifted from objective scores, like this is what this game is, to personality based coverage. And yeah, I get why people love Kingdom Hearts. It is not for me whatsoever. And like that's how video games should be covered. So
I have a weird thing with Kingdom Hearts where I was like, it's my absolute favorite, but if someone asks me if they should play it, I'm usually would tell them no. No, it steals your life. You can't. Don't start on this. It's not worth it.
Self-aware.
Yeah.
And you won't understand what's going on either.
You know, there is a there's a reason the formula has been copied a little bit, and like people joke about the Ubisoft formula of video games with go to a spot, get all the markers on your map. There is so I do interdisciplinary work, and I worked in a neuroscience lab when I was still a doctoral student back when speaking of theology beer camp, back when Tripp and I were out in Claremont, California. These like little tiny tasks that give you rewards do just trigger little chemicals in your brain that's like, oh, that was good, that was good, that was good, that was good. It's why a lot of therapists say, like, if you're struggling to get through your day, make small checklists and just write down like simple things, and you're like, oh, I did the thing, I did the thing, I did the thing. It works on me. Like, I do enjoy playing those games because I like just churning through those tasks. I will say God of War 2018, when they kind of really they didn't reboot it because it's connected to the previous story, but that's up there. Like, I think they nailed that story. Like, sad Kratos kind of realizing how he screwed up in the past was actually a cool retcon of the way the stories in the earlier games were not as good as they could have been, in my opinion. We can get into like Greek myths and how they kind of botched them, in my opinion. But God of War 2018 was great because they actually incorporated their own mistakes into why that game was good. Assassin's Creed, it's just like a summer blockbuster popcorn flick. I get through it. It doesn't do much more than that for me, but that's still cool. Yeah, I feel that. Christian, I'm sorry. We shouldn't have brought up Kingdom Hearts. You mentioned, this is why I didn't mention it, because I knew this would happen. You mentioned how, like, if anyone starts it, they'll never understand it. And I just want to throw out there, my pursuit of trying to understand the Bible and realizing I never will is exactly the same as my pursuit of trying to understand Kingdom Hearts and realizing I never will. There is not a difference. It's just the impact it has on my life is different, but the pursuit is the same. Yeah, that's all.
The only reason I'm not reacting more is because I know you would say such a thing.
All right, on to God of War. We have a few different themes we wanted to discuss with this game. And I feel like we've all made it pretty clear that, like, the new ones are better. We prefer them to the old storyline. I think that's just pretty much universally true at this point. That being said, the audiobooks for the old God of War series, good. They're good. I enjoyed them. Also, you can get them free on YouTube. Don't use your Audible credits. So first things first is, like, a large part of the original story is Kratos seeking revenge. And then some other crap happens to Kratos, so he seeks revenge for the new crap. And then some other character stuff, right? Like, so it starts off, he's a Spartan. His brother is basically killed because of some stupid prophecy thing. So he goes on a revenge ramp. And then he's tricked into killing his own family. And instead of being upset at himself, what's he do? He goes on a revenge ramp. And then he has a daughter. Some other stuff happens. And you know what happens? He goes on a revenge ramp. Eventually the story ends and he finds out that his own dad is Zeus, who has been trying to kill him and do all this stuff the whole time. So it's like all of the gods, everything has constantly been against him. Yeah, I don't want to oversimplify it. Ben, do you want to add to like what happens in this story? Like, it's hard for me not to be like, it's just revenge, 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 because that's basically what it is. But do you have anything you wanted to add?
No, in a sense, because I think that's fair. So early God of War games, to me, played fantastically. And especially like high school age, they're violent, they're gory, the action's great, the set pieces. They really like, oh, I can get into this. But then growing up, getting into philosophy and theology, I was actually on a podcast with, he had no responsibility for the story or character design, but the music designer for the original God of War games. And before I actually didn't know, I knew they were two people in the video game industry, but I didn't know that he worked on the God of War games before I trashed them on the podcast. And he's like, you actually have a point, which is, look, the Greek gods, it's a dead religion. People are not practicing that now. So I think the developers took a certain sort of license with, we can just do whatever with it. And so like the gods mess around with humans. That's what they do. Like that's what the Greek gods do, which sure. And Kratos is mad at them for doing that. But even at the time, like even if you go back to ancient Greece, there were people that kind of took them as myths, but myths that inform the human situation, just like American myths about John Henry and Johnny Appleseed are not taken to be like real people that did these like ridiculous things that a person can't do, but they inform what people think it is to be an American. They could have done so much better, kind of sort of respecting ancient Greek culture and what it had to say about the human predicament. Because it's like they could have, there's lots of reasons to be mad about your situation in life or also exhilarated. And the Greek gods are like personifications of that. So let's attach all the things that make us happy or angry in life to gods. And, Ares, war, and Ares, war, Athena, like protection, love, all these things that we do with each other. They still could have screwed around with Kratos and made him pissed off, but then he really would have had things to be pissed off with the gods about, because it's not just us gods screw with Kratos and then Kratos is like, me angry, which is what they boiled it down to. And the 2018 game was great because they actually kind of let the gods be what they actually are in the mythology.
Yes.
And represent what they're supposed to represent, as opposed to just all the gods just screw with humans, and they have no differentiating characteristics, and then Kratos is angry. So when I was on that podcast, I told him, you guys could have made the game more accurate to the Greeks, and Kratos could have been even angrier because he would have had more justification.
Yeah, yeah. And I mean, I don't want to like just pass over like what happens to him. Like in reality, he does have his brother murdered, more or less, or according to what he thinks is murdered. Turns out he was, whatever. He rescues him later, and then he'd still die. So I don't know what the point of that was, but whatever. He thinks his brother's killed by the gods. He is tricked by gods to killing his own wife. He kills his own wife and child. Like, I mean, some real crap happens to this guy. Like, it's not like it wasn't bad. It's just that it was redundant. I think that's what, like, it cheapened it. Like, if it was a real story, him being tricked to killing his own wife and kid, holy crap. Yeah, let's go murder all the gods. But it wasn't a real story. It was just redundant over and over and over. And it's like, oh, how can we make him mad this time? How can we make him mad this time? How can he be mad this time? You know, which cheapened what was actually happening, I think. Which is, again, like you brought up in the 2018 God of War, what was so good is that they show where he's like just pissed off. He's like, all gods suck. Because in his experience, it was just, they all sucked. Right? Like, it was just all bad. There was no good. And I like that they incorporated that into his story and what happens in those later games.
And when I say,
largely what we're going to talk about.
When I say like they didn't do the Greek gods justice, it's more like that's really valid motivation for Kratos. But every, like, you know, you fight and kill various gods, and they could have messed with Kratos with their character trait, but all they do is show up and be like, I'm mad at you, Kratos, and then Kratos is like, well, I'm mad at you too, so let's fight. Like, they don't, it's not like,
yeah,
I'm threatening
it's not
you.
nuanced.
Yeah, I'm not threatening you with regret or worry or even being like, so many ways they could have like messed with, like, the Greek gods are horny as hell. Like, they could have messed with Kratos missing his loved one, and the Greek ones, the gods taking that from him, but they just show up and it was like, well, I'm angry too. Like, if you read any Greek philosophy, I represent like love and eros and stuff, but I'm just going to show up and be angry, and then I guess you're angry too. So that's the sort of thing they missed out on, in my opinion.
Oh yeah, they definitely kind of cheapened it. Which, like you mentioned, the motivations and stuff in these newer series, newer set is, in my opinion, it's much better. Not just for the antagonist, but even for Kratos himself. He has a line, and I kind of already mentioned it, but it really sat with me, where all the stuff that happened to him and all this, and his son is trying to figure out what's going on. They live in the world of the Norse gods, and his son's like, well, maybe they'll help. Maybe this is a good god. And Kratos looks at his own son and says, there is no good god. There are no good gods. Something like that. One of the two. And I don't know. For me, I was like, oh, that was the moment where it clicked. And because, you know, these are all, not that they're fake religions. These are just religions that are so separated from us today in our own culture that I don't think about it like that. But I was like, oh, Kratos had like the most intense case of deconstruction. And there's his son wondering about religion when he's had the worst spiritual abuse of anyone ever. You know, it's like, oh, so this is how a father who's experienced that is wrestling with how he interacts with his kid who is wondering about religion. And that's one of those things to me that made the game intensely interesting. Christian, you said you played this one too. Did you, when you had these things, were you thinking about this kind of thing, or were you just kind of like getting to the next part of the game?
No, I was thinking about it because I knew from prior watching of other people playing what Kratos had endured, and to see this man who is changed, the rage is, it's still there, buried, but he is trying to do better. He's trying to be someone else, trying to influence his son to not be like the gods he knows, because in every single god he met before, pretty much, was a complete and utter jerk, someone that was not worthy of being worshipped. And that's one of the parts of Greek mythology that's really so messed up if you actually study it. It's like, these are the people we're making the stories about. These are the people we're bringing offerings to, because, well, if we don't, they're going to screw us over, or the crops aren't going to grow, or the people are just going to die because they didn't feel like they were being appreciated enough. Or one guy said, I like this god over this goddess, and then suddenly there's a war now, or what have you. And I actually, a couple of years ago, I preached a sermon starting off with just a myth of Pandora's jar, and how that was the basis for a lot of Greek philosophy and their ideals of hope is an evil thing. Where we look at that now and go, yes, oh, something good was released from the jar in addition to every evil thing. But for the Greeks, it was like the final knife in the coffin, was hope, being given a chance to hope in something when there was nothing to hope in, was just the most evil thing they could possibly imagine. And for Kratos, he can't begin to hope, to think that gods could be different, because in his experience, that doesn't exist. So for Atreus here, eventually revealed to be Loki, like that's going to help form part of his philosophy.
Yeah. Man. Also, was this sermon just you explaining why you didn't like the Star Wars sequel trilogy?
No, that's in my everyday life.
When hope is bad. No, yeah. So add a little context before I throw it to Ben. This story, so picking up after the last one where it was revenge, we pick up where he loses his wife. And if you've played the original games or knew the story, which I didn't when I came into it, I feel like the experience is probably really different because he's already lost a wife and child and then another child. And like this happens to him a lot. And it's kind of like, oh, why should Kratos give a crap that another wife died? Like at this point, it's not that big a deal. But coming into it fresh, I was like, oh, this sucks. And you can tell in this story, it really impacts him. It really hurts him. And his kid's trying to figure out how to deal with death. And he is just stoic. He's just cold. Probably because of a lot of what happened to him before. And the mission of the first game, he's just simply trying to take his wife to the top of the mountain where she wanted her remains to be left, basically. Second game, Ragnarok is happening, and spoiler alert. I mean, I don't know how to like paraphrase this. Odin's just afraid of death. That's what happens in the second game. Odin is scared of death and wants to know what happens when gods die, and that's his whole. Like that's like to me that was like his big motivation. But so we're starting off in the first 2018 God of War, and his son's asking like about these gods and stuff. He's like, hey, there's no such thing as good gods. Ben, did you want to comment anything on that before we moved on to any of the other topics around this?
Well, I just, it reminds me of going back to my master's of theology studies days. So just finished undergrad. I'm a master's student now. And Catherine Dar at Boston University teaches Hebrew Bible. She is a scholar of, largely focuses on like women in the Hebrew Bible that are kind of not written about and spoken about as much. And we had a few classes on Job. And if you remember the story of Job and his buddies, where all the worst things imaginable happened to them. And all of Job's friends are like, well, I mean, God has a reason for it. You can't question God. It's God. So just take it, Job. And Job is like, screw that. Why the hell would God do this to me? And you know who got the response in that story? Job. In the story, God spoke to Job, not the friends that were like, oh, God, you can do no wrong. Oh, there could be. Job, the person who was questioning God and said, hey, God, why the hell did you do this to me? I did everything you wanted. Why would you do this? Job got the response. So there's to me, the connection is there's an iconoclastic, like you're not supposed to ask these sort of questions thing. It's actually at the heart of both Judaism and Christianity. I think good theology, regardless of religious tradition, like enfolds that within itself. And there's a real questioning of why would God do this? And then conversely, Odin doesn't want to die. And then Kratos' son is becoming a god. And nobody has just like been in front of God, like I'm holding up a book. I'm like, this is the book. Nobody's on the other side of God to be like definitively, oh yeah, no, that was God. We got it correct. Like we're humans trying to understand something and apply our concepts. So some of those concepts are going to die and new ones are going to have to be reborn. And that's what that's why theologians have debates about different concepts of God, and that's healthy. And the way you actually phrased Kratos, Odin, and his son actually just made me think of that.
Yeah, what's interesting is like what you brought up, and man, ever since we did an episode on my other podcast with Trip about salvation models, and my brain's just been turning since then. But it's interesting because part of what Tripp said in that episode, this is on the Whole Church podcast, but he mentioned how a lot of our salvation models are almost a reflection of our times, of how we think of this thing with Jesus. And the important thing is that Jesus did a thing, and what that thing is, we might not understand, but in different contexts, we think of it differently. And it is interesting how, like, that same period of time where the Christus Victoris model was so, like, prevalent, where it's like, these are the bad guys and Jesus beat them up, is the same time where, like, we have this Greek understanding of there is a god of death, there is a god of war, there is a god of this, and these are things that we can have defeated, and maybe these gods that we like will beat these gods we don't like. And, you know, there wasn't like a war like that in mythology that I know about, but I'm not an expert of Greek mythology. It's just interesting that when that happens is the same time we have some of these salvation models and how they kind of like overlap. And especially thinking of Kratos' own story in the video game, it's, oh, the gods are angry, let me beat the gods. That is very close to that whole Christus Victor, Jesus is going to beat up death and sin and bad guys kind of model. Yeah. Sorry, did not mean to get on that tangent. It just made me think of it. But as far as like some of the other themes before we move on to Assassin's Creed, I want to specifically talk, I know we already mentioned it, but how we deal with death is a big part of this 2018 God of War game of like, how do we respect the dead? How do we move on from death? How do we like even contemplate it? I mean, even in Odin's story later on, Odin is afraid of death. So this whole concept in the new trilogy, what I think is a trilogy, not sure, the new series, seems to be dealing with this idea of like, how do we deal with death? Whether you're a god, whether you're a human, how do we make sense of it? How do we honor it? How do we move past it? Christian, do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, it really just shows how much Kratos has grown over time, in that he is going this far for someone that he easily could have just left behind. And yeah, he had feelings for her once, but I mean, she's gone. I could just burn her right here, but no, he goes on her request to honor what she wanted to as part of her heritage, as part of who she is, and then takes Atreus with him because he needs to understand that too. And Kratos, of course, is not big Mr. Happy, I'm going to share my feelings towards you, boy, but that's part of what he's doing. And I think it's super important that the Kratos of the original games is not going to do this. It's only a Kratos who's suffered and gone through as much as he has before that will do something like this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I even think we could, we're not going to, because it would just take too much time. We could even talk about how like people who marry cross culture like that, and when one of the spouses pass away, like, do you have that responsibility to raise your son with an understanding of all the cultures that he came from in his past? Because, like, as far as Kratos is concerned, all the Norse stuff is stupid, right? Like, he could have been like, yeah, ignore this Norse stuff. But he's like, no, your mom's part of this. Let me travel, like, across the 9 realms just to respect what she wanted to be done with her body after death and teach you about your own heritage that I have nothing to do with at all, basically. So I thought it was really, to me, that's another show of growth in his character, that he's like, hey, this isn't my culture. Not only do I not like gods, I'm also not really part of the Norse stuff at all, but I'm going to raise you in this because it's part of who you are. Benjamin, do you have anything you want to add as far as like how they're dealing with the questions of like death and fear of death and honoring the dead, all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I mean, what Christian was saying made me think of original PlayStation 2 Kratos is not going to be like, boy, you're like useless and terrible, and in the very next scene he's willing to die for him.
Yeah.
But there's a real regardless of whether somebody thinks kind of mainline Christianity and the story of Jesus is true, there's a real power and something true about sacrificial logic, where Kratos all of a sudden comes around to the gods are maybe making this world a worse place, but my death can make it a better place if it teaches my son something. And that can be totally like atheistic, just helping out your family. Like, it's not even like, it doesn't have to be theological. Like, there's a human truth in thinking about sacrifice as more powerful than God's dominating. You know, The Matrix touches upon it. All sorts of TV shows, movies, and games have touched upon it. And Kratos' own turn to being a father, and all of a sudden being more interested in sacrificing himself, and that will live on and do something better, is, you know, it goes against the we're all individuals looking out for ourselves, and I can sacrifice for the greater good. And I think even players that aren't religious at all, it resonates with them. I think that's why the story was praised so much in that game.
Oh yeah, I might need some clarity on this. Was it revealed before or after Kratos was willing to make that sacrifice that his son was actually Loki?
I
remember.
I believe that was kind of a end of game thing leading into the sequel.
Okay. Because I was thinking, like, if he knew that his son was a god, how much more that would mean. Because, like, he went from, like, all gods are evil, I'm going to kill all these guys, to my own son's god. And not only am I, like, still going to own him and love him, I'm willing to die for him, despite the fact that I hate the idea of deity, basically. Man, yeah, Kratos went through a lot of growth. The new series, great series. Love it. Definitely worth the play. And with that, this is a double feature. Christian, take it over.
All right. It's time to move this bad boy into the discussion of Assassin's Creed. Now, these are a very wide set of games over very different time periods. So we're not going to touch everything as we discuss this. So if your personal game doesn't get mentioned, or we didn't mention your favorite character or anything, it's not because we don't like them. It's because we do have lives outside of this. So, guys, as far as religion is handled in this series, we start off in the first games in the Crusades. So what are our thoughts on how this is portrayed, everything? Joshua, go ahead.
I just want to say that this is weird for me, but like, you know how it's like someone's Roman Empire, like this is my Roman Empire, or like for some reason I feel like a lot of girls these days are like into the Bridgerton time period era. Like, it's like about the era. It's not more than it is about the story. For me, it's Crusades. I don't know why. I love stories that take place during the Crusades. Like, mind you, I understand the Crusades were absolutely awful and a terror and like a horror to mankind. And I could not see, like, I couldn't possibly begin to scratch the surface of how evil and terrible the things that happened under the Crusades were. But the era, the clothing, the sword style, like all of it, I'm like, man, I eat these stories up. Like, I just think they look cool. Like, and fighting in the scene. And it's like, for me too, when this game came out, I was kind of like, I think I had a lot of repressed emotions where I didn't know I was angry at some church stuff. Like, at the time I was like, I still love church. Like, mind the way, I do love church now, but I had a journey since this game came out to today. And part of that journey was realizing I didn't love a lot of stuff that happened in the church. But when the game came out, I don't think I was at that point yet. I think I was at a point like, I love the church. And yet sometimes it kind of felt good when I saw them as the bad guys. And I just didn't have words for that yet. And I think that's why part of this game kind of played into that of like, yeah, these guys, this is the bad church. My church is good, but these guys are bad guys, so I'm going to kill them all. Like, I was like, oh, this is great. Yeah, that's kind of where I was.
Ben?
Well, there's a real the whole setup of the first game, which they've really continued. And I wish they would kind of give up on the gene time travel device thing. It was kind of it was quirky and weird initially, but they got this big convoluted story going on now of throughout time people through each other's genes fighting a war between good and evil. But that is itself, I mean, that's a very religious setup of the entire series. It's very, I mean, really, even more than Christian. Pick your known world religions that say this is good and this is evil. Like it's really Zoroastrian in a way. So, like the Zoroastrian religion really thought good and evil were cosmic forces behind everything, and that's what the God. That's what the. Not I'm saying God of War. Yeah, that's what the Assassin's Creed franchise is. It's not just that. Surprise, the Pope is an agent of evil in this game, but it's cosmic forces behind them. And that, I mean, that's a straight up religious concept from ancient times.
Yeah. Sorry, since you mentioned some stuff, it made me think. First, I want to say the Gene storyline, the part of like going back and like how it relates to our time and like some of the like conspiracy theory kind of stuff. That storyline was great up until the end of Assassin's Creed 3. And that gets at why I think Black Flag lost me that you mentioned earlier. Where I'm like, oh, now this part of the Gene storyline doesn't fit anymore. And now it just feels weird and forced, and I didn't love it. I feel like the series could have ended at Assassin's Creed 3 and it would have been fine. And everything else could have just been proliferatory, whatever stuff. But also, man, I'm trying to think of what you said that made me think of something. Good and evil, bad guys, good guys. Man, my brain doesn't want to go there. I'll think of it later. Sorry.
Okay. The animus was the word you were looking for earlier.
Well, can I just, like, based on, I mean, not really knowing you, but based on what you said with, like, the history with church, like, I think it could have been refreshing for, like, an honest depiction of, yeah, look, like, the Catholic Church and Christians did lots of terrible stuff, and that's a big setup of the game. I think a lot of people liked that sort of honesty where it actually did give a decent historical setting and honest description of what was going on. It gave it cosmic and then supernatural technology, like made up trappings. But that was based in saying something honest about, as humans, we don't like to, we like to pretend a lot. I focus a lot in my classes about, let's talk about stuff that we as people were terrible at and did wrong and were awful, because we like to move past that and pretend like we're all just perfect angels now. Whereas dwelling on the bad stuff is actually pretty informative, because we have a lot of those tendencies with us still see, churches that want to condemn and in certain parts of the world, like execute people if you're not the quote unquote right sorts of person in the name of God. Like dwelling on real faults of the church, which is the whole basis of this game, because the cosmic bad guys are the church, and the assassins are basically more aligned with, if you think of good and evil, and like the assassins are basically more aligned with God than the self-ascribing God folks in the game. Like that sort of honesty is helpful.
Yeah. I think that's part of how I convinced myself. See, and mind you, it's just hard to go back in time because like I'm at such a different point now with my relationship with the church and theology and everything. But I think that's how I related to it back then. Is like I felt like a lot of the church were hypocrites and they were saying one thing and doing another. And then I felt like I was one of the only people who was like, which everyone feels this way, So it's kind of laughable now looking at past me, but it was like, I'm one of the only ones who like read the Bible. I'm like, wait a minute, it says love people. Why are we doing this? And yeah, especially just the context I grew up in, not to justify it, but there was a lot of like, we love people. And by love, that means we have to tell them they're going to hell or else, you know, they're going to go and no one warned them. That's not really love, right? And I'm like, oh yeah, that makes total sense. And yet you justify it and justify it and justify it until it's like, I just feel stupid, but you don't have words for why it feels stupid. And then you play a game where it's like, hey, these guys are doing that thing you think is stupid. Go kill them. And you're like, yeah.
Well, like real briefly, like one of the reasons I like games and engage them as a theologian is because games can really like hit the player with that aha moment that you like get in person, but so often hot button issues are debated so abstractly that you're not actually talking about people. It's these political talking points that people on TV and now the internet, wherever you get your internet from, used to be Twitter. Now, you know, whatever. I'm not going to call it X. It's Twitter forever. You know, but you're not actually talking about people. You're just batting around ideological ideas. Whereas, say, a very common story is, say, conservative Christian parents that have a child, and all of a sudden they come out as gay or lesbian, and then the parents are like, well, crap. You know, I can't hate my it happens, unfortunately. Some parents do hate their children, but by and large, something that turns a lot of conservative Christians' minds towards accepting LGBTQ plus folks is relatives. They're like, oh, I love this person and I know this person because I see them as a person. And you don't get a person in the media. In video games, like something you're expressing is these are people because you have to interact with them in a storyline in the game and you're doing stuff to them. Just that little, like the little bit of interactivity that the games offer. It's like, oh crap, they're people. And the Crusades did this to people. I find that significant.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's funny because like in video game world, it can be as absurd as possible and it's still, you're able to kind of like overcome that threshold of like disbelief of like, oh, this is stupid. This can't be real because you're so engaged with what's happening. So like I mentioned Ratchet and Clank earlier. I feel like that's a perfect one. Ratchet and Clank is possibly the goofiest, most nonsense kind of game ever where like you can defeat your enemies by throwing a disco ball at them. Like there is no level to the ridiculousness that is Ratchet and Clank. And yet when I play that, Captain Quark feels real. And he's basically just Donald Trump, right? Like I'm like, oh, wait a minute. I know this character. But like when you're playing as ridiculous as he seems and like throwing disco balls at enemies and turning people into sheep and like all the stupidness, it still feels real in the moment because you're so engaged and everything's happening so quickly that it almost like you're forced to have your guard down because of what, like how interactive gaming can be. Sorry, that's more like gaming in general. Sorry, Christian. I'm going to shut up now.
It's okay. It's fine. I was enjoying the conversation. So the original question about the Crusades. My history with them has always been one, you know, you start real young and you go Christian, good guy, everyone else bad guy. And you hear about these and you go, well, why didn't we succeed in the end? Why didn't we keep Jerusalem and all this? And you actually study what's happening there and you go, okay, yeah, a noble goal, protect Jerusalem from, you know, other religions that would use it for their own ends. But at that same time, it is being used by Christians for their own ends rather than out of a humanitarian desire to, you know, bring liberation. It's done to that. One of the things was so pilgrims could make their way there safely, but that wasn't the real reason. The real reason was, hey, there's this Muslim threat anyways here, and let's make it so they can't expand as much as we don't want them to. You know, the Eastern Roman Empire is asking for help. We don't really like them, but we don't like the Muslims more, so I guess we'll be strange bedfellows here. And you explore in the series how all these people from these different backgrounds can become evil regardless of where they are from, regardless if they're Christian or Muslim, or if they have no faith in God at all. I really do enjoy that because that is very true to real life. I just, when it comes to the topic of the Crusades, it's always what people just think is that slam dunk against Christianity. Is like, you know, if Christianity was the true religion, the Crusades wouldn't have happened. And my response is, which crusade are you talking about? Are you talking about the Baltic Crusades? Are you talking about the Sixth Crusade? The Fourth? Which one are you talking about? And most people have no clue what those words mean because they just hear crusade and they think there's just one. When the history around all these things is there is a ton. It wasn't just in the Middle East. It was in the Baltic area of Europe. There were crusades fought up there. And yet people don't focus on those because they don't know their history. And they just think, well, if I know just enough, then I don't have to worry about anything else.
Yeah. One of the most interesting, sorry, this is like a random recommendation in the middle of the episode, but the other one, the other slam dunk that's not crusades is people like to bring up the Spanish Inquisition, right? And G. Willow Wilson writes a book, The Bird King. Beautiful novel, wonderful story, and it takes place during the Inquisition. She is a Muslim woman writer, writing from the characters that we're following that we love are all Muslim characters. And yet she's able to show Inquisition is evil, bad guys, these suck, and still show that there are good Christians even in that time period and then what's going on there. Like, she didn't just paint it as black and white kind of issue. And man, that kind of story is beautiful. That's the kind of thing I love. And I don't think we get it as much in like the first Assassin's Creed, but I think later on you still see where like sometimes you're like, wait a minute, are the Templars right? Like, hold up. Are we even right to be on the assassin side? Because sometimes they do kind of make you question yourself in these games. And that's something I love a lot that they don't do in the first game that comes up later on that, that started here. But anyway.
Well, something, if I can inject my own method into this conversation briefly, I don't think any dogmatism is really helpful in any form of inquiry. So like anybody can be mistaken about anything. Buddhists actually are onto this a lot. Like there's a lot of Buddhist kind of short poems about not mentioning Hitler specifically, but basically, since we have no essential nature for Buddhists because we're nothing and it's just passing moments to moments to moments to moments, we could be Hitler in one moment or we could be a saint in the next. And it's like only by like the grace of heaven, like, do we go one way or the other. It's unhelpful to just say demonize these folks because they're wrong, because it ignores actual good work being done within, because the group is not individual people and there's people trying to change it and fix it, and somebody that can be mistaken is maybe actually in their heart actually trying to do the right thing. They just haven't been exposed to maybe some corrective measure of, oh, I don't need to kill this person and be supporting the crusade for them, but a sort of naive, like forced naive, in the context of the Crusades, forced naive innocence where information was not as available. That some people were actually probably really good doing what we would now say bad things because they were tricked into doing it.
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I like the points. Man, you made me think of another book, but also I don't know the name of it. Guys, email me if you want to know, but one of the most challenging books I've read was a Buddhist commentary on the Book of Mark. It was really interesting. But more on that later.
Okay. Well, speaking of Buddhists, let's go to the Egyptian and Greek mythologies.
Perfect transition.
And how do we think about how they're portrayed within the games?
Yeah, I didn't play these. These were after Black Flag. I gave up by this point.
Okay.
Sorry.
Then your opinion?
I like
I
these.
apologize.
These are some of my favorites. I like that they do some real cultural work. They show how. Yeah, this is an anthropological fact. Again, apart from who's right about what, but you've got Christianity modifying Judaism, modifying the Roman culture it came out of, modifying the Greek culture, who are modifying the Egyptians. This game actually does a decent job because you're actually digging through these monuments of showing how, the Egyptians and the Romans are kind of talking about the same gods but giving them different names. And it does a good job of unmasking the human element of religion where, all right, so, okay, God is real. We're the ones that got to think about it, and we're borrowing ideas from other people. And Christians did not drop from an alien spaceship and just come up with ideas out of nowhere. They were using Jewish concepts, which were using Roman and Greek concepts, which are really borrowing Egyptian concepts. And then it goes deeper, like they were borrowing like Mesopotamian concepts. So I love that those Assassin's Creed Origins and Odyssey, for their historical aspect, I loved.
Yeah, I've definitely replayed Odyssey the most out of these, and learning more each time. And when it comes to the Egyptian side of thing, well, actually for Odyssey too, for Origins and Odyssey, there's sections focused on the afterlife and what that looks like to these different religions. I mean, we have goodness gracious, Bayek in Origins. Yeah. Confronting gods in the underworld. And then you have the Egyptian underworld. Then you have Alexios or Cassandra, depending on who you play, dealing with the underworld and Hades and Tartarus and all this, and how that is affected by the Isu, ISU, all the way being these horrific people who control the earth. And really at the end of the day in the Assassin's Creed world, the religions that we know and love today don't have basis in the fact in that they're influenced by the Isu, and that there is no, God as you would look at him in that regard, from a Christian point of view, from a Jewish point of view. And to see the characters struggle with this and all across the series, it's a very multifaceted way of looking at it, because we haven't really covered that part of like the Christian perspective of learning your religion is a lie in this series. So looking at the Greek and Egyptian side of things, we learned, hey, what you believe is a lie, but for the characters there, they were already kind of fighting it to begin with. So there's not as much of a struggle, but I do find it fascinating they chose to focus on those things.
Yeah. What interesting too that you brought up is like how they're borrowing, like Christians borrowed from other cultures, borrowed from other cultures, borrowed from other cultures, et cetera. When we build up our knowledge, I think a lot of people hear, oh, this borrowed from this other thing, and they go, oh, this is proof that it's not real, and kind of throw it out. And one of my favorite, like, I don't want to say comebacks because it's not like a gotcha thing, but like one of my favorite things that I've heard someone like explain in response to that is, hey, do you believe that atoms are real? Do you believe in the science behind molecular structures, all this kind of stuff? It's like, yeah, okay. All of that language was borrowed from Greek philosophy when they thought of these tiny little particles and they came up with the name atom. And what they thought of was wrong, but we still borrowed that idea and those names for our science today that we've proven. So just because something was borrowed from another culture or another type of thinking doesn't make it any more or less true. So I always think that's an important thing to kind of just hold in your mind and like be able to have these things in contrast.
Well, and there's something I think the borrowing from stuff I mentioned, kind of like going down a set of stairs to ancient cultures. Um, One of my good colleagues, Wesley Wildman, is basically functionally an atheist, a religious naturalist, but he loves all world religions because he says they're wrong about thinking, if they think there's an ultimate being in control of their lives, they're wrong, but they're correct in that they keep being religious. And the connected, like the fact that there is connect. So this is why I bring him up. The connective tissue between the steps, like the fact that there actually is connective tissue, is the Mesopotamians, the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans, the Jews, the Christians. It's not just that the stories and names changed. They're also stayed very similar in some ways. They tell similar stories about a singular figure being cast out and then coming back to help. They tell similar stories about sacrifice. They tell similar stories about the expectation of an afterlife, and also what you should do now, as opposed to just believing things and hoping for an afterlife, but you should help others now. Like, they touch on something deeply human, that you're not living a fully human life unless you engage in these religions, because your business degree doesn't tell you to help other people. Your accounting degree doesn't do that. I guess maybe nurses are told to help other people, but it's in a very specific context. Like, even some people that think all religions are wrong think religions are also astoundingly correct, because you're not living a full life unless you're engaging with these questions, even if you think the metaphysics is all just made up nonsense. And the fact that there is that connective tissue is sort of an indication that they might have a point, because these are people just trying to be good people. And it changes over the years, but they're doing something that no other sphere of life is doing, which is why theology is still relevant.
Yeah, I like that.
Okay. Going on from there. When it comes to the titular assassins of Assassin's Creed, they have a motto. They have tenets, but this is separate from them. And the idea of nothing is true, everything is permitted. What are our thoughts on this idea?
I'm just confused. That's all.
Okay. Why is that, Joshua?
Well, if nothing is true, then your sentence right there is not true. That's a paradox in of itself, so that's dumb. Everything is permitted. Does that include getting rid of the assassins? Seems like they're not for that, so I feel like it's a statement they don't even believe. It just seems like nonsense to me. That's all.
Ben?
Can I ask, I'm asking for some behind the scenes info. You're like, there's some motivation for asking this question.
Uh-huh.
I would like to know that.
Because I don't believe it. That's why, if you're looking on YouTube, you see, doesn't, doesn't permit everything. I don't believe in this ideal, but I'm curious to think what others have to say about it.
So I've been kind of espousing my philosophical theology motivated by pragmatism. It's very open-ended. So the way that I do theology is basically in the method of science applied to theology. So it doesn't mean I'm doing science while I'm doing theology, but it's got to be open-ended. You got to be open to criticism. You got to be open to new ideas, and you got to be ready to like throw away bad ones if they look bad, just like we used to think that humors were a thing, and we stabbed people and just let them bleed out, and then they died, and I guess they were too sick, and if they passed out and woke up and lived, we're like, "Hey, a good scientific procedure." So we don't do that anymore. So it's not that, but it's a spirit of science applied to theology, which means that nothing is sacred in the sense of being off limits of a genuine criticism, but the criticism has to be in the right sort of spirit. So I would agree with so let's see, nothing is true. So none of this might be true, sure, like staunch atheists might be correct, but not everything is permitted, because you got to engage in the criticism in the right spirit, which is the same open-ended, welcoming sort of fashion. And that is, you can't just put up like prejudice and bias, and like, racism still props up lots of religious beliefs in part of this country. So I went hard 90-degree turn from Assassin's Creed to just talking about religion in the country from your quote. But I mean, so I'm with you in that not everything is permitted, because you can't have a genuine open inquiry into what does it mean to be, say, a Christian in this country, and what is the notion of God, which is inherently beyond all of our understandings, if you're not willing to do it in that open-minded spirit. And that line is really what divides all sorts of churches, and it's why sorts of denominations have split over hot button issues.
Can I give a more honest answer to this then? Since we're being more serious. First off, I still think the statement is nonsensical. Like just the way it's worded poorly. But that's more etymological than anything. Nothing is true. I think what they're trying to get at that is like nothing is known for certain. I think that's what they actually mean. They don't actually mean nothing is true, because if nothing is true, then
you would be right.
Nothing can exist, because anyway, that nothing is true is just not a smart statement. But if what they mean is that nothing can be certain, I still have hesitancies with that, but that's because I don't like absolute statements. Only the Sith deal with absolutes. Only the Sith. That's an absolute statement.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah. No, but I mean, seriously, I do have a problem myself. I always hesitate to make absolute statements, because if I say, I agree, we can't know anything for certain, well, there's probably something that someone can pin me on and be like, okay, so you don't know this for certain, you don't know this for certain, and at some point they're probably going to get me. Like you don't know for certain that what you're seeing right now is a bookcase. Well, I guess I do. I do know for certain that what I'm looking at, what I perceive there to be a bookcase. So I know that is true, that is my experience. Like I don't know. I don't like absolute statements. So I just get hesitant about that kind of thing in general, which is why I have problems with creeds. I'm learning to be more comfortable with them, but it's always like wait a minute, do I really believe that? Everything is permitted is a little bit easier for me, because again, I think they're trying to advocate for some kind of anarchy, or like down with the establishment. Everybody can kind of do what they want, free will kind of thing. And my favorite Bible verse is Galatians 5:1, where it is for freedom. He set us free. But I don't think that freedom means that anything is permitted. Because if I'm going to say that means my freedom can then encroach on other people's freedoms. I am completely free to murder Christian and stop all of his freedoms. That's not right? Like there has to be some kind of line. And both sides kind of do this in our country to get political. You have conservatives who are like, oh yeah, we need to just completely let people need to have their rights, and gun rights and all this stuff is right, and we need to just let people exist because America's land of the free. And like, okay, cool. So people are free to be gay and have abortions. Nope, that's not what we mean. That's not allowed, right? And then on the other side, if you're going to go with the liberal side, and I'm not saying either side's right, I'm just saying either side's kind of hypocrites. They're like, oh yeah, freedom, let people be people, let them love who they want to love. And then you know, there's all kinds of lines to that if you really bring up. Like the liberal side is a lot harder when it comes to, and I think I will say I agree with them, but they're a lot harder on lines of like what counts as rape, what counts as sexual assault, what counts as harassment, what counts as like abuse. And there's all this stuff that, you know, even if I agree on them, you're saying love is love. Sometimes you don't really mean that, right? Like sometimes what you're saying is that's not really permitted. We still have lines, and both sides are kind of hypocrites on that. For me, I don't think liberals are more hypocrites on that. I think they're more hypocrites on, oh yeah, let people love who love, be with who what. Let's stand by the Constitution. The Constitution says all this stuff, and then you bring up gun rights, and I'm like, oh, nope, not that one though. And it's like, okay, which ones do we mean? Everybody wants to pick and choose. And what if we're just honest and say neither side actually wants you to be totally free? They have different values that they prioritize. And let's discuss what values we agree with rather than try to make it, oh, they hate freedom and we love freedom. Like, that's not the case. That's not what's happening.
There's a quicker
rant over.
Well, you hate your absolute.
Just pick a libertarian politician who wants everything to be permitted, and you'll immediately get lots of things that they don't want to be permitted. So
yeah, that seems to be the case, and it's regardless of what side you're on, you know that the Department of Justice is against your side, and the court's not being fair to you or doing what you thought they should be doing, and everybody's upset because we are that polarized. And I think that's something we see in Assassin's Creed too. You know, the Assassins, and if everything's permitted, we don't know anything for certain, but we are pretty certain the Templars are wrong and we should kill them all, and being a Templar is not permitted, right? So it's kind of like they don't believe their own statement.
Well, you mentioned you don't like your absolutes, and that's why we work so well together, because I love my absolutes. And I absolutely hate this statement. I get the spirit of the statement. I understand challenging the status quo. I understand doing right for the sake of doing what's right. But at the end of the day, this is anarchic tomfoolery to me that I want nothing to do with. So I look at the statement like nothing is true. Well, as you stated earlier, that can't be false, or it can't be true, because you just created a paradox there where nothing is true except for the statement, which is true. And, you know, I am telling you a lie right now. I didn't just lie to you. Like it sounds cool. I'll give it that. But at the end of the day, it doesn't make sense theologically, philosophically. Yeah. Everything is permitted. Once again, can't get behind that statement either, because there are some things that should never be permitted. Ben brought up excellent points about racism earlier. Like, well, if we've established we don't like racism, well, why don't we like racism? So that establishes an absolute that people should never engage in this behavior. So where does that absolute truth come from? And obviously, I'm going to say that comes from God, as the one who created all things, as the one who is the only one who can say what is right and wrong. So, and then people are going to debate that statement. So that's where I stand on this. I'm not a fan of the statement. I can get behind some of the spirit of the statement, but I will never be saying this is my personal creed.
Yeah. Can I, one more time, get a little, get very political? I won't say a little. I'm going to get very political for a second, if that's okay.
It's your show too.
A lot of what we're talking about here also reminds me of, I don't know if you guys ever heard the phrase, free speech for me, but not for thee. A lot of it reminds me of that kind of stuff, of how like one side will be like, will argue for free speech in one case and then get really upset if something happens. You know, I don't want to get too specific, but you know, there are cases where people are being told you have to say this on your website because someone's hiring you to say this on your website. And they're like, okay, yeah, we like that message. So everybody's on board and saying, okay, yeah, we should pass that law. And they don't think about, okay, well, what if the case was different? And it wasn't something you agreed with. It was instead someone who believed in Nazism was hiring someone to create a website that says, hey, let's kill all the Jews. Well, obviously we're all against that. And it's like, we don't understand the principle. We only understand, do we like what people are being told to say or not? And that's where it's like, free speech is important, because even the most atrocious speech has to be free, or else no speech is free. So the speech that I hate the most, I still have to support, in my opinion, I still have to support it being able to be said, not only because I can't combat the reasoning or the logic if people aren't free to say it, but also because if I limit them, it is going to eventually limit the side that I like. In a society that uses the kind of laws that we use. So I think Christians need to support, whether or not you like the speech, you got to support free speech, in my opinion. And that's where, all speech is permitted. I'm down for that. But that doesn't mean I have to like all speech. That's different.
And it doesn't free you from repercussions of what you have to say.
That too. Hate speech is still hate speech. Sorry. Anyway.
It connects to the game in a bit, in that the Templars do try and really control a lot of speech, where in an ideal world, speech is open and the racism, sexism, homophobia, etc., is naturally sorted out because people are all actually open and honest. But it's a game about power dynamics, and the Templars are trying to control what people are freely open to do. So that just mirrors reality. Ideally, everybody, the best pragmatic philosopher about the public scene was John Dewey. And he said, we don't actually have a democracy because we don't have an informed republic. Like, ideally, every single voter would be informed, but everybody is just like, I have an opinion, and that matters. Well, it might be I'm in Boston. I'm in Watertown, Massachusetts. It's right next to Boston. Boston is about to win the NBA Finals. Kyrie Irving, I think he just does it because he's a little bit younger and weird internet stuff that I don't quite understand. Kind of sort of seems to think the world is flat. All right, that's your opinion. Like, that doesn't matter whatsoever because that's nonsense. Like, you actually want people with informed, like, voting opinions that naturally just sorts all that stuff out, rather than just, I have a crazy idea and it matters just as much as the Nobel laureate's stance on the issue. But that's not the way that everybody has their idiosyncratic ideas and holds them as precious as really, really, really informed stuff. And the Templars versus the Assassins is, I don't know, kind of like that.
Yeah.
He's got the more authoritarian versus the more anarchic. They're not totally anarchic in everything. They have an organization to their structure. But
they're libertarians. I just wanted to make the joke about assassins being libertarians. That was all.
Wow.
You still set me up. Sorry.
So, the basic idea being Templars wanting to control the way the world works and being in charge, being the ones to make sure everyone is on the same page, not allowing the certain freedoms of questioning things, of resisting authority when authority does things wrong, versus the Assassins, who for the most part are there to create not a balance, but more on the side of making sure people are free to make their own decisions. So what are your takes on this, guys?
Templar bad, but they look cooler. Yeah. Yeah, that's my informed opinion.
I mean, they need each other, right? Like, it's like Batman and Joker like need each other in some way, but like they don't kind of like do their thing without each other. They're both a little over the top, which actually, like, so we kind of, like, we were just talking United States politics for a little bit, but it actually does connect to the game series in that they've both taken it a bit too far. And you can find in the games, the Pope is often like a bad Templar that you got to go after. But some of the, I'm blanking on the games, but I mean, I just know that some of the popes have been okay, but they're being influenced by Templars that are quite extreme. You even have assassins pushing back on each other. So we started off. And I brought up the Zoroastrian thing about like cosmic good versus cosmic evil. One must, which really is the story. I mean, that is the thing they're doing with Templars and Assassins, but they do make it more nuanced, and that there's people in both groups that are not 100% on board, at least. That's developed over the years. Where even some of the assassins kind of question why they're doing it, especially like I like Bayek in Origins. Like at various points, the assassins are like, "You got to do this thing because the Templars. I'm trying to avenge my son. Like my wife and I just want to do this thing for our family. Screw your cosmic war."
Yeah.
So they have introduced that nuance.
Yeah. I'm going to reference a future episode because that's something I could do here. We're all time travelers. It's fine. We will be discussing in Supernatural some of the politics that happen in the TV series. And one of the things that gets brought up that we're going to talk at length about in the future that I think applies directly to the Assassins and Templars too. You have this comparison of the British men of letters in the show, who are people who hunt monsters, basically, who have a whole system down to where in the UK, there has been no monster in years and years and years and years. Whereas America, there's a monster of the day, constantly. They're constantly monster after monster after monster. And it's like, oh, it looks like the British are doing it right and we're doing it wrong. And we just need to all fall in line and do this one big federal system where we eliminate all the monsters. But then you find out some of the vampires are actually good. Some of the other monsters, sometimes things are a little bit more nuanced and you can't just have one rule fits all, kill all of them. But what you're left with at the end of this is this question of like, is it better that we killed all the monsters even if some of them were good guys? Because now there's not monsters out there murdering people. Or is it better that there's monsters out there murdering people, but we didn't falsely persecute anyone? And that's the question that series kind of leaves us with. And I think that's what the Assassins and Templars are getting at here too, right? Like where is it better that we just say, hey, everybody follow this system and we won't have problems? Or is it better that people have that freedom because that one rule fits all doesn't work and some people get lost in the system?
I think that's an excellent point. Go ahead, Ben.
The supernatural trolley problem.
Yes, the supernatural trolley problem.
Yeah.
Crowley wants to know, will you pull the lever?
Wow. And I'm looking forward to being on that episode with you. But for the Assassins and Templars, it's order versus chaos. And not total chaos. That's not what the Assassins want. But as far as simplifying things, both are wrong if used poorly. And order is a naturally good thing. This world was created to be ordered, but then sin is introduced, the fall happens, depending on how you interpret that. And disorder is brought in there. And that disorder changes what was supposed to be a good thing. But then some people, their version of order is not good. I mean, we've already invoked Godwin's law, so might as well not bring it up again. I would not agree. I would agree with the fact that the Nazi party was organized. That doesn't mean they were organized well, but they were organized under a structure that did a lot of evil in the world. That is inherently wrong. But that does not mean an ordered society is a bad thing. It just means it was done poorly. And between the Templars and the Assassins, the Templars are controlling the world in their image versus actually bringing an order that brings freedom. And that sounds contradictory, but at the same time, that's how the two could align if maybe such an alliance were to actually happen, is that there needs to be that nuanced take of, in a fallen world, there's order that needs to respect our fallen nature, while at the same time punishing that fallen nature for doing evil.
May I just say that Assassin's Creed 3 shows this perfectly in the nuance? That is the game that I got the most into. I loved Assassin's Creed 3. But one of the things, it's because I really like colonial America. I like that almost as much as I like Crusades. History's fun. Anyway,
yeah.
But I liked how they showed how the Native American people were treated, even by the Americans who were spouting this whole, hey, freedom, 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 but also let's oppress these guys. It's like, wait a minute, like take again. How much freedom do you really want? Then you also have like the story of the people in America who are like the founding fathers, and some of them just straight up don't believe in God at all. Some of them are like, oh, let's pretend like we believe in God. We'll put this in the writing, and like they have all this stuff included, and a lot of it's very historically based. But it brings up this nuanced thing of like, some of the Templars weren't all bad. They wanted good things. Some of the assassins were bad. Some of the founding fathers were Christians with good intents. Some were Christians with bad intents. Some didn't believe in God at all, but pretended to. Some didn't even bother pretending. And you have all of this nuance here laid bare. And you have this people who are trying to oppress the Americans, and the Americans who are shouting freedom while oppressing others. There's a lot of nuance in the story. So like, even though it is, like you mentioned, like it's the cosmic good and bad, but it's also the how good are the good guys and how bad are the bad guys at the same time.
Well, along those lines, Assassin's Creed Freedom Cry is probably thematically their strongest game ever made. You were actually putting the assassins kind of anti-establishment intents to like it mirrored the real world. Like you were a black character freeing black slaves, and contrary to your disdain of Assassin's Creed 4, it was it was the expansion DLC for that game. I know like critics, and I speak at a lot of video game fan conventions, and just black fans who were like, I was playing as someone like me, saving people like me who didn't get that in their own lifetimes. And like, they said, like, I broke down crying. Like that, I mean, that doesn't even require elaboration. Like that right there is the power of
that's
video.
awesome. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Does anyone else have anything they want to add before you start wrapping up?
I also think Assassin's Creed 4 is very good, and Joshua is wrong.
Thank you.
I also think that Joshua was wrong.
But ironically, that makes you wrong.
I like the hatchets. I like the hatchets in Assassin's Creed 3.
Okay.
Like if I'm just gonna gush on Assassin's Creed 3, I think that's part of why I really loved it. I thought it just added a lot of unique fighting style in the game. You have a lot of other games that have swords or ninja moves or other stuff. I can't think of another game where I get to like just play around with a hatchet. Like that was fun. That was cool. But also, Black Flag as the pirate nerd, it got all of the stuff that it needed to get right was right. Like it was good. Like I have to say it was good. I just didn't enjoy it. But who they picked for the main antagonist of that game? Smart, genius, good move.
Okay,
that's all.
So since this is also on YouTube, Joshua has given himself more work to do because he's going to have to edit this part out. That being the 2 bonus questions that we'll be doing. Since we're covering 2 different series, we decided to do 2 bonus questions. By we, I mean me. So our bonus questions will be, where would we like to see the next Assassin's Creed game take place? And how would we feel about Kratos and potentially his Norse and Egyptian counterparts being the 3 wise men who went to see Jesus, as is one of the original possible endings of the franchise? So thank you guys for all you do, for listening here. But please, before we go, does anyone have a recommendation besides the 50 that Joshua offered today to the audience?
I feel like I've given too many. Just go read The Bird King. I'm going to bring that one up again. Yeah, it's a good book.
I just finished watching the Fargo TV series, and it's great. Watch Fargo.
Okay. All right. I'm going to say it's not. There's some plenty of political intrigue. It's not the same kind of game, but if you want to check out something, there's some similarities here. Check out the Telltale Game of Thrones game that they produced. Deserves a sequel very much. I really enjoyed it. It's got some of your typical Game of Thrones nonsense in it, but at the end of the day, it's an enjoyable game. Yeah, so you couldn't go wrong actually checking it out. So with that in mind, thank you guys for listening. We really appreciate everything you do. If you're on YouTube, please like and subscribe. You've got to help Will's heart. It just gets broken every day. The more videos we release, the less likes they receive. And not that we don't get likes at all, but not enough to keep him healthy. And we want Will healthy. We want him to live forever. And your likes are the only way to do that.
Yeah, he thrives on likes and subscribes. That's it.
If you're listening to this on the podcast, please rate us on your favorite store, wherever you're at, Apple Podcasts, Podchaser, Spotify, wherever the heck you're listening at us from. Big thanks again to Russell Gentry for supporting the show. You can check all the episodes we have in our Religions and Fandom series down below. And remember, we're all the chosen people, a geekdom of priests.